So, welcome to today's episode of the Executive Coach Podcast. I'm Maya, I'm your host, and we're in our money and finance series. We have looked at vision and your rich life, and then we've spent last week looking at the abundance versus scarcity mindsets. Today, I want to dive into some principles, and I'm going to start with a book that made some headways probably a few decades ago. And so I feel like in some ways it is foundational. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm not going to stand up and say, go out and read this book. I found the tone in some places a little bit mean and a little bit scathing. So, what I hope to do, which is something that you have been feeding back to me that you like, is I want to give my translation of this book. I've spent some time hunting around for good summaries of the book. I read it about a year ago. It did have an impact on me. It did change the way that I was thinking about money. And so I think it's worth sharing. Some of the stuff will be absolutely a no-brainer for some of you. I know that you're very hot on your finances. For others, it will be new. And for others, it will be a useful refresher or perhaps shift the way you're thinking about certain elements. And so using a blog that I found up on clickup.com, I'm going to structure 7 lessons from the book and give a few thoughts on those and how we can be adding those to our thinking, as well as a couple of other points as well, and maybe even some quotes from the book as well. And so, yeah, I do want to caveat that I am not endorsing the entire style of the book. I think that there are some real caveats that we need to put in place. It was written at a specific point in time where it maybe had a different relevance. It's through a very specific lens of how this individual decided to make money. It's American. And so we need to cut through all of that. And then I still think there is some gold here. So the first thing, and I do think this is probably the most enduring part of the book, is his point, which is to focus on assets, not liabilities. This is a book teaching people about how to be financially independent and how to build wealth. And Kiyosaki's point is that we often get confused between assets and liabilities. He defines assets as things that bring in money. So, property, rental property, stocks, businesses. He defines liabilities as things that drain things from your pocket. So that includes a home, a car, credit card debt, and other things that create expenses. And so he gets into detail with the example of the house, which I've also mentioned Ramit Sethi takes a lot of issue with, because a lot of people do consider their house to be an asset, but actually he puts it in the liabilities category because he says that if you buy your house and you use a mortgage, you're only incurring expenses. You get no income from it, and therefore it is a liability. And so only rental property is in that category of being an asset. And what he is advising here is to really build assets that bring you income, not liabilities that incur expenses. He talks about the fact that we should be thinking about if there's items that we want or if there are things that are sort of nice to haves, rather than buying those first, we should be using that money, putting that into pots, allowing that to become an asset, buying assets, and then using the income from that to purchase what it is that we like. And when we do that, we create that recurring income, and therefore we've, instead of draining our finances, we've actually created wealth. The second lesson is to get a financial education. These 2 dads that he had, one was his real dad biologically, and the other was a dad of a friend, and they had very different financial philosophies. And he used that to point out why financial education is so important, because the poor dad was extremely well educated. He believed in earning a salary, whereas the rich dad was financially literate, though less educated overall. And he was the one that believed in investing money, running businesses to build wealth and become financially independent. So there was this contrast between the 2 philosophies. And so whilst he, I don't think, was entirely knocking being educated for its own sake, he was making the point that being financially educated is a whole different ballgame. And often our schools fail us in not actually giving us this education. If we can invest in financial education, learn the basics of money management, risk assessment, then we're going to be in a much better position to build wealth. The third lesson is that he is advocating having your own business. He's saying that having a job and earning a salary is not going to be the thing that makes you rich. Running a business will. He talks about earning passive income from assets as the key to building wealth over time instead of relying on a salary. Rather than working really hard to make money for somebody else, let others work for you. He also talks about really understanding the tax code and the legal system. And this is going to have maybe some specific relevance to the US. So I'm not going to dive into this in as much detail, but he really advocates understanding how that works, whether you're an employee or have your own business, and in which ways you're rewarded for which of those. And I think this is where it gets very country specific. He then talks about learning to invent money and make strategic decisions to do this. He discounts the philosophy and that sort of belief that we often might hear, which is just working hard and doing a good job is what's going to make you wealthy. He argues that the rich invent money. They capitalize on opportunities, take risks, and they cultivate multiple passive income streams to acquire wealth. And so, again, he is really advocating not working for money, but buying assets that will work to earn you money and deliver infinite returns. And the examples that he gives of such assets are businesses that don't require active supervision. The reality is those are not always very easy to find. Rental property that provides a passive income. Again, let's just caveat that for those of us in the UK, being any sort of a landlord has become incredibly difficult with interest rates and various other government policies. So again, that's why this is a very specific, I think, to the era that he was of. Yet I still think that there is some gold underneath there, which is around the fact that there will always be ways of having more passive income streams. So the other example he gives is financial investments that pay dividends over time. Now, this one's really, I think, quite interesting, which is to work to learn rather than for money. So he talks about working to acquire skills, not to earn money. So if you work to earn a paycheck, you'll never get out of the rat race and acquire real wealth, according to Kiyosaki. However, if you want to develop new skills, you'll become more talented, open up new earning opportunities for yourself in the long run. And so rather than aspiring for a well-paid job, he wants to shift people's mindset towards aspiring to things that are going to support you to become better entrepreneurs. So he emphasizes the importance of building marketable skills. And his example is that of McDonald's. So when he asked a room full of people, can anyone make a better hamburger than McDonald's? Everyone raised their hands. And yet McDonald's is a multi-million-dollar business. What he's saying there is that everyone can make a great hamburger, but turning it into a profitable business is the valuable skill. So acquire those skills that will help you earn money and work to upskill yourself, not for the paycheck. Again, I think that's very interesting advice, especially as we think about, our kids and what sorts of ideas that we want to put forward for them as well. He also encourages taking financial risk. So he says, take risks to become rich. That's what he's advocating. If you follow in the footsteps of what everybody else is doing, you'll become part of the crowd. If you want to escape the rat race, you must do something different. He talks about trying new things, exploring various opportunities instead of letting them pass you by. So if you really do want to gain massive profits, you must take high risk. And this is again a really interesting differentiation that he makes now that I'm about to set out, which I think is worth lingering on. He explains that job security differs from financial security. A secure job can actually provide you a false sense of security that could lead to complacency because, of course, external factors can always change. You may lose your job, however secure you think it is. Whereas building financial security involves investing in stocks, bonds, rental, and other assets that create multiple income streams. That gives you financial security. And therefore, if one income stream is affected, you'll still have many more. And so I think this one is something that does come up a lot in coaching, because when I'm working with somebody, the opportunities that they have ahead of them and the things that they are hoping to achieve, they will be massively affected by how much financial security they have currently got. It's going to have a really big impact then on the decisions that you make. But I guess if he's talking about financial risk, should we be therefore taking unnecessary risk is the question. And he's saying, absolutely not. We should be really learning how to take calculated risk, carefully weighing up options, but then not hesitating on good opportunities because we have risk aversion or limiting beliefs. So, those are some of the lessons. And we can also summarize these in a slightly different way, which I'm going to just hit pause and then refresh and come back and do. So the ClickUp blog picks out 5 key ideas. I am going to translate these a little bit and also pick out the ones that I think are worth us taking away. So the first one is really moving to a mindset of not working for money, but having your money work for you. And he talks about investing in assets, creating multiple passive income streams, as we've talked about earlier on. And he, gives the example, of course, if you invest in other people's businesses, you're letting your money work for you to generate more money. And you're not actively working for it. You're letting that generate income and gather wealth over time. So he's advocating a shift from thinking about not working for money, but having your money work for you. I think it's a worthwhile shift. I don't necessarily agree with the way that he has chosen to phrase it all, but I do think that when you start to look at things through that lens, it gives you a slightly different picture of the world. Many of us will be in sort of a hybrid way of thinking where, yes, we have as one source of our income, we work in that way for money, but we may also then want to create other income streams to generate more of that financial stability. I did have a friend who told me that we should have 7 income streams, apparently. So the next one is around thinking about acquiring assets rather than acquiring liabilities. So he talks about building wealth by acquiring assets that generate income, such as stocks, bonds, and real estate, rather than acquiring homes, cars, and other possessions that masquerade as assets but are actually liabilities because they drain money. And I think some of this is about prioritization. So in the quest for wealth generation, he would advocate really prioritizing the former over the latter. It's not that you won't also go down the route of acquiring some of these other things, but don't. I think what he really wants to make sure is that people are not misguided into thinking that they are building wealth by acquiring homes, cars, and other possessions that look like assets. He really wants people to know what are the income generating assets to be focused on if they are in the pursuit of wealth building. And I guess in the financial independence world, and there are a lot of podcasts about this is prioritized. So it's really thinking smart about where you then put that money. Should you be using it to buy a house, or should you be putting it into other assets, and really starting to prioritize and be savvy about how you do that if you are in the pursuit of, for example, financial independence, which we're going to talk about in upcoming episodes. The other idea I think is interesting, which is financial aptitude. So, earning money is the first step he describes, but to be wealthy, you need the financial aptitude to know what to do with that. He talks about the fact that when you invest in financial assets, you're using your money to let it work for you. And so he's really, again, hammering home that point of buying stocks, bonds, rental properties, and other income generating financial assets. And what he's saying is that financial literacy will help you to learn how to have your money make more money. And then, to end, the final big idea is around that your mind is your most valuable asset. It's not your material possessions. If you really train your mind well, develop strong financial IQ, you can gather wealth. And it's your mindset and values that you really need to focus on. So that's the kind of note that he ends on. There were some quotes as well that I think interesting. One of them is that in the real world, the smartest people are the people who make mistakes and learn, whereas at school, the smartest people don't make mistakes. So I think it's just highlighting often that our education doesn't necessarily set us up for success when it comes to wealth generation. So just to conclude, I hope that I've given a sort of a balanced appraisal or a balanced summary of this book. I do think that the tone used when it's been written is abrasive and it will offend. So keep that in mind. But I think it's one of those where we don't want to lose some of the messages that are there. And so I hope I've conveyed some of those to you. I hope it's been of interest to you. Let me know how you find it. Let me know if anything is particularly standing out to you in the way that you're now going to be thinking about money. Personal example, I got some curtains when we were doing the house. It was a real rush because it was kind of like the final thing that we needed, and they've really been bothering me. I'm not happy with them, and I know what the replacement cost would be. It's not huge, but it's not tiny, and so I'm kind of stuck with these. And so whilst I am in a position to just replace those, I'm having read the book last year, I've decided to take more of an asset building approach, which is that I want to utilize the money that I could, use to just go and buy those curtains. I want to utilize that in an asset building way. And once I have created a sufficient pot that will, at least in today's interest rate environment, are a little bit more conducive to this, that would be able to create the income that will be able to pay for that. That's when I'm going to replace the curtain. So I've set myself a little challenge. It's just a small personal example to show you how you can put some of this stuff into practice, and it's a fun one, right? So it's just something whereby I have a choice of the way I do this, and I want to do it in the asset building way, so that when I do it, I've built that up, and therefore the following year I would be able to use that on something else. So that's my small personal example. I hope you've taken something useful away from this. I will be sharing a couple more of these episodes over the next couple of weeks. So look forward to connecting with you next time. Bye bye.